Conditions May Apply by CinnamonPinecones. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 116. Round 3, Part 1. Izuku was up against Tokage from Class 1B in the first round of the bracket, and would likely, sorry Kaminari, be up against Shiozaki in the second round. He had seen very little of either of the girls' quirks, Tokage more so than Shiozaki's. Hers was difficult to miss. He should really be focusing on strategy, but he couldn't get his mind off of Todoroki, who, no offense to Ida and Sarah, he would probably be up against in the third round, assuming he got that far. He was regretting telling him to use his fire. Half of him wanted Todoroki to discard his restraints, but the other half of him was still a little scared kid who was too afraid of getting burned again. No, he wasn't a little kid. He was training to be a hero. He couldn't let childish fears control him. Todoroki needed to learn to use his fire, and if Izuku could help him do that, then it was his duty to try. He shouldn't have been so stuck in his head about Todoroki. He should have been focusing on who he was up against because, as the starting buzzer rang out, he found himself surrounded in the blink of an eye. So it seemed Tokage must have been the owner of the floating limbs he had caught glimpses of in the cavalry battle. He had thought this was the case, but he hadn't known for sure. Though it's not like he used that hunch to his advantage. He had no plan. As quickly as he was surrounded, he was being advanced upon. She wouldn't expect him to dodge up. He was surrounded on all sides, and down was the only logical option left. But he'd been wanting to practice his super jump since the USJ, so up it was. He braced himself, activated One for All, and leaped just as the barrage of floating limbs were about to make contact with him. A hand managed to grab his ankle, but the strength of it was no match for him, even without One for All. After he rolled to a stop, he wrenched it off of him and tossed it aside. Tokage is out of bounds. Midoriya is the winner. What? The announcement confused him before he realized how hard he had thrown the appendage. Oh, well, that was underwhelming. He could have at least vamped it up a little bit. He just made Tokage look pathetic, and he didn't even show off what he was capable of. He couldn't help but nervously bite at his lip as he turned back to Tokage, who was reassembling herself at the center of the ring. She looked at him with her lips pressed in a firm line and bowed politely. When she brought her head back up, her face held a forced smile. He shot back a nervous one in return and bowed as well. That could have gone worse. It also could have gone better. He felt like an ass. He let Tokage pick the exit tunnel she wanted to use before he headed to the opposite one. It would be a longer walk back for him, but he had already inconvenienced her enough. He didn't need to get in her way any more than he already had. He wanted to get back to the stands to watch the next fight so he could scope out his competition in person. But he didn't make it in time and ended up watching it on a small TV in one of the waiting rooms. It was better than missing it entirely, but he would have been able to catch details that the cameras didn't if he'd been there in person. As he had expected, Shiozaki won against Kaminari. He really needed to get some support gear for his quirk. If Aoyama could have his belt, then Kaminari should have something to focus his quirk as well. It wasn't safe for him or the people around him as it was. He made it back to the stands just as the next round was about to start. Todoroki versus Sero. He didn't really need to analyze much to predict the outcome of this match. Sero was completely outgunned. It was hardly fair to him. Even if Sero was fast enough to restrain his opponent before he got frozen, Todoroki would still be able to use his ice. As far as he'd observed, the only thing stopping an ice attack from him was making it so he couldn't touch anything. If Uraraka could get the first hit in, she would be a good match. But as it stands, very few people even had a chance of winning against Todoroki. The fight went as was to be expected, but the force of Todoroki's attack was completely completely disproportionate to what was necessary. He froze half the stadium. Was he trying to show off? Why did he do that? As the camera cut to Todoroki thawing out enough of the ice to free Sero from his confines, he realized that attack was fueled by anger. Why was he so angry? Was it because of what Izuku had said to him? He hadn't seemed angry as much as he had contemplative on the walk back to the arena. Something had clearly changed, and Izuku could only hope that he hadn't pushed him too far. He stayed seated for Ida's match with Mei and pressed his lips into a straight line when Ida walked out wearing support gear. He knew where this was going. He had chatted enough with Mei earlier to know that she didn't lend him that gear out of the kindness of her heart. Poor Ida. Poor, gullible Ida. He was too kind-hearted for his own good. Halfway through their advertisement break fight, he noticed that Uraraka had gotten very fidgety. She was up against Bakugo in this bracket. He didn't envy her, but she stood a chance if she played her cards right. Though Izuku would also be up against him if he played his cards right, but he was doing his best not to think about that. All too soon, the first bracket came to a close and he was up again. He hadn't gotten to see much of what Shiozaki was capable of offensively, but he had seen how strong her quirk was at defense. His first fight was over pretty quickly, but he had a feeling this one wouldn't be so simple. If she managed to trap him, he would not be in good shape. Those thorns didn't look like they were just for show. He did his best to remind himself that he knew far more about Shiozaki's capabilities than he did the random thugs he confronted on a nightly basis. However, his reasoning wouldn't shut up about how the random thugs he encountered on a nightly basis didn't get into UA. And that's not even to mention the fact that he didn't have Eraser on his side right now. Ivy would have been dead in a back alley years ago if it weren't for Eraser. No, nope, no, that wasn't helping. He'd been up against worse odds, and this was just a game anyway. A game that the future of his career may or may not be riding on, but a game nonetheless. He heard Mike announcing Shiozaki from the stadium speakers. The sound muffled itself as it echoed off the walls of the tunnel and made its way to him. He didn't really listen to what they were saying because he knew he was going to be announced second. The nice lady that met him here had told him so, at least. As Shiozaki's introduction wound down, he made his way toward the front of the tunnel where he could hear the announcements much more clearly. Oh, I am just getting news on our second contestant. This just in. Class 1A's frontrunner only fights people who also have green hair. Togaru and Kamakiri might not be in the bracket, but they'd better watch their backs. It's Midoriya Izuku! Mike introduced him over the loudspeaker. As the cameras cut to him coming out of the tunnel, he was already laughing. That was so stupid. Why was he laughing? Maybe he was nervous after Shiozaki's showing against Kaminari, but he just couldn't help it. He shook his head and reminded himself that billions of people were watching him right now, and that was enough for him to get his head back in the game. With a smile still on his face, he took his place in the ring opposite from Shiozaki. As the buzzer went off, Shiozaki dropped several strands of her hair and let them sink into the ground, tethering herself in place, a good strategy after seeing his fight with Tokage. He felt the ground rumble ever so slightly, and that was enough warning of what was about to happen for him to avoid the vines re-emerging from the ground behind him. He didn't bother with them at all. He just gunned it straight for his opponent. He saw her eyes widen as he approached, and the look of genuine fear on such a young face made him falter. It was only for a split second, but that was enough. More of her vines shot forward and enveloped him in an instant. The sharp thorns cut up his skin, and the constriction shot enough adrenaline through his veins that he didn't even think before he activated One for All and ripped them off with more force than strictly necessary. He burst out of his impromptu chrysalis with a rumbling boom. shaking the ground enough to throw Shiozaki off balance. Though she was off her feet, she didn't lose focus as he charged forward. He had to dodge her vines with each step, impeding his progress significantly. It slowed him down, but it didn't stop him. The strength of her vines was nothing against the force of One for All. But then again, the strength of his bones was nothing against the force of One for All half the time, so that didn't really say much. The closer he got, the more difficult it became to dodge. But by the time he made his way to Shiozaki, he made up his mind. He had to fight dirty. Generally, hair pulling wasn't a very chivalrous way to fight, but when her quirk was her hair, he's not sure he had much of a choice. He didn't give himself time to hesitate again. He grabbed as much of her hair as he could and pulled it toward her head as he used his leg to pin it further down on the ground, creating enough tension for it to snap between the 2 points of contact. She tried to fight against him without her quirk, but it was of little consequence. She wasn't very strong. Before she got the chance to grow back any of her vines, he tossed her out of bounds, sending her rolling for several yards. The moment Mike announced the winner, he went scrambling after her to make sure she was okay. She just gave him an indignant look, which he couldn't blame her for. He offered her a hand up, and she schooled her face into something more graceful as she accepted the offer. I'm sorry. Does that hurt? Your hair, I mean. She eyed him critically for a moment before relaxing her expression slightly and replying, mildly. It's nothing I'm not used to. So she could feel things through her hair, at least to a certain degree. That was so cool. If she could get an internship with someone like Kamui Woods, she would really learn a lot. Their quirks were quite similar, if his theory about Kamui's quirk was correct. It was certainly worth looking into at the very least. She cocked her head at him, and he shot back a nervous smile. Thank you. I'll see if I can look into that avenue. Should the stars align, I think it would be a good opportunity. Oh, he'd said that out loud. Dang it. He didn't get the chance to do anything but sputter out nonsense syllables before Shiozaki turned and left the field. As he had done last time, Izuku made his way to the exit opposite of his opponent so as to not make the short walk unbearably awkward. Maybe one day he'd have the social grace to walk out with his opponent laughing like Kirishima and Tetsu had after their rematch. But today was not that day. Any exposed skin he had under the shoulders was covered in scratches and sluggishly oozing blood. Thankfully, that was just his hands and wrists. That's probably why Shiozaki hesitated in taking the hand up he had offered. Gross. He needed to get some bandages. It wasn't significant enough to risk the dizziness that Recovery Girl's quirk might cause. The cuts were shallow and clearly didn't hurt enough to impede him, so healing them could wait. He got back into the stands just in time to see Tokoyami throw Ashido out of bounds like a rag doll. He winced in sympathy, but honestly, it made him feel better about what he did to Shiozaki. He wanted to know how Ida's match with Todoroki went, but when he scanned the seats for him, he was nowhere to be found. Todoroki was there, but Ida wasn't. Did he have to go to Recovery Girl? Was he okay? He shuffled back to his seat next to Uraraka as unobtrusively as he could before asking her, Where's Ida? Did he get hurt? No, he's fine. He lost, though. Did you not see the match at all? Todoroki cornered him. She replied with a frown. I don't know where he went. He should be back by now. Something about that didn't sit right with him. Ito was supposed to be sitting in the student section, and he wasn't one to disobey orders, at least not without due cause. He had just gone to his bag in the locker room to get his first aid kit, but his phone was in there, and if he wanted to contact Ida, that was the only way he could think to do it. He didn't even consider taking it with him because everyone who had his number was already here, so there wasn't really any point. But as he dismissed himself from the stands less than a minute after sitting down, he was beginning to regret his choices. The halls were empty as he wandered back through them, so it was easy to sense a presence around the corner before he could even see anything. The air was getting warmer and warmer, and he could hear the telltale gentle whoosh of flames. The orange light that started to bounce off the walls around the corner confirmed his suspicions. Was that Endeavor? He wasn't supposed to be back here, but pretty much anyone else would be audibly concerned about the fire that bathed the corridor in a soft glow. As Endeavor rounded the corner, he looked down at Izuku, both literally and figuratively. He hadn't spoken a word yet, but everything about his body language told him that he believed Izuku to be beneath him. Ah, I was looking for you, he greeted, still staring down his nose at him. Why the hell was he looking for him? Did Todoroki tell him his suspicions about his connection with All Might? He didn't seem like the type for idle chit-chat with the old man, so he doubted that was the case. Either way, he had his guard up. He had never trusted Endeavor. And after what he had learned about the Todoroki household today, well, he was struggling to keep his expression neutral. Okay, he answered dumbly, too focused on not spitting the vitriol that came to mind at the sight of him. I watched your fights. That's an impressive power you've got. Strong enough to shake the ground. You have a lot in common with All Might. He sneered out his name like it was a curse, and the blatant disrespect made Izuku want to Detroit smash his shins. Thank you, sir. That's very kind. I can only hope to be a hero like him one day, he replied, sickeningly sweet. Endeavor's expression almost made him laugh, but thankfully he managed to fight it back. It looked like he was sucking on a lemon. Izuku took that as an opportunity to take his leave. That face was too satisfying, and he feared he would get himself into trouble provoking it again. With a nod and another sickeningly sweet smile, he walked past Endeavor without any sort of proper dismissal. It is my Shoto's duty to surpass All Might as the #1 hero. His match with you will be a good testing ground for how much training he has left. So hit him hard. Don't disgrace yourself or him by holding back, Endeavor called over his shoulder. Izuku was glad he had his back turned because he could do nothing to hide the expression that comment elicited. Hit him hard? Izuku had a feeling that Todoroki had been hit enough in his life. He didn't need Izuku adding on top of that. Endeavor himself had seen the power he was capable of. If he didn't hold back at all, then Todoroki would be gravely injured. However, Endeavor's not insignificant record of civilian casualties and property damage on his arrests told him that he didn't care for anyone's suffering in the slightest. I'm not All Might, he replied before he could think better of it. He knew the anger in his tone was thinly veiled at best, but he'd gone too far to stop now. And Todoroki isn't you. He bit his tongue before he could remind the man that his son's successes wouldn't make up for his failures. He didn't wait for a response. He just walked away. Nothing good was going to come of this conversation continuing. Maybe this is why Todoroki had been so mad. His father probably tracked him down too. Izuku had half a mind to call security on him. But it's not like Endeavor would face any real consequences, so he might as well leave it be. He had a match to focus on and a friend to text anyway. As he closed the locker door behind himself, he let out a groan. That man was insufferable for a single conversation. He couldn't imagine what it must be like to live with him. He needed to get Todoroki out of that house ASAP. By the time he drafted and sent a text off to Ida, it was time for him to get back out on the stage for his fight with Todoroki. He had heard the announcement that Kachan had won against Kirishima, which both didn't surprise and disappointed him in equal measure. At least there would be a consolation prize of not having to fight Kachan if he lost this match to Todoroki. Silver lining. He sighed heavily as he tucked his phone back into his bag. He had a match to get to. End of chapter.